Hey everyone, I thought I'd give you all a little bit of a summary or overview as what I see as some of the main design and transport planning challenges for the Montague Road precinct of West End. I know there's a few community conversations coming up about this, and over the years we've run a few different community forums and surveys, and I've had a lot of discussions with residents and also with council officers and transport planning experts. So I thought it'd be constructive for me to sort of lay out the situation as I see it in the hopes of kind of informing further discussions and making sure people are kind of aware of my position and what I think about some of this stuff. So I'll share my screen and take you on a brief little tour of the area. As most of you watching this will be aware, that western side of Montague Road has seen a lot of development in recent years. There's a lot of new apartments and a lot more residents moving into the area. But there's also still a lot of businesses along the main Montague Road frontage. So it's not just that lots of people are who live in the area are moving in and out of Montague Road. Montague Road is also a really it's an employment hub. It's a hub of commerce in and of itself. It's got some big destinations, like there's the new Woolworths shopping centre and all those shops, but there's shops and warehouses and a few older factories and stuff all the way along the corridor. And then there's also, there's the Queensland Ballet, there's a few larger institutions, there's the Davies Park markets, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, there's kind of three related challenges. There's the question of how do local residents who live in the area move in and out, and where are they moving to? There's the question of how workers and visitors who live in other parts of the city can move in and out of Montague Road. But then there's also just the question of how do we make Montague Road itself a public space, a vibrant place where people can meet and connect on the street rather than it just being really like a noisy through corridor. So this is sort of a zoning map of the area. The dark red is like high density residential, and the orange is mixed use with sort of a mixture of residential and commercial. So one thing that you immediately notice here is that all this area, it's just zoned for residential, and there won't always be many shops and services at ground level of the new apartments based on this zoning. And I don't actually think that's ideal. I think we probably want more mixed use zoning in some of these areas, because then there are more shops and services locally where people live, rather than those residents who live in that area having to leave to access basic services and essentials. You want more of that stuff to be located in close walking distance of the apartments. This is sort of a common development problem and pattern across Brizzy, and you see it really badly over in Kangaroo Point, actually, where there's a lot of high density residential zoning, but not much mixed use, not much commercial shops, et cetera, et cetera. So all the residents who live in that part of Kangaroo Point are driving in and out, even just to go to the supermarket. So things aren't quite as bad as that over in Montague Road, but it's still a bit of a problem. So one of the simple changes to be thinking about is how can we support more businesses and local services and facilities to be located within sort of the West End area, so that people don't have to drive in and out. And then there's obviously still the question of how to move other visitors in and out of the neighborhood. I'll just briefly turn on the flood overlay, which you can see this is how flood prone that whole neighborhood is. And this is one of the reasons that I think we shouldn't be encouraging too much more residential development down in that area in general. It's not a good idea to be cramming more and more people into a neighborhood that's so severely flood prone. So I guess keep that in the back of your mind as well. But yeah, the challenge is that there's thousands of people who live in this area. There's thousands of people who work and visit the area, and it's simply not efficient to move all those people via car-based transport. So Montague Road is a single lane in each direction. At the moment, it has a bit of street parking along each side, but with the thousands and thousands of people living and who are going to be moving into this area, it's simply not practical for all those people to move in and out of the precinct by driving individual cars. So really what we need to be doing is encouraging a shift towards public and active transport. Now, luckily we've got the Blue City Glider bus service, which carries a fair number of people. I think there's over 300 buses running up and down the Montague Road corridor per day, and we need to encourage more people to be traveling by bus. But there's a couple of significant issues there. One major problem is that the buses are getting caught up in general traffic. So because it's a single lane in each direction, if people are driving and the cars are all backed up in peak hour, the buses are just held up in general traffic. And you see this not just on weekdays in peak periods, but also on Saturday morning with the markets. So really the solution there is to have dedicated bus lanes. You've got your general traffic lanes for cars and trucks and whatever, and then you have separate lanes that can carry buses. And if we had those separate dedicated bus lanes, we'd probably be able to move even more people even more efficiently via buses. One of the limitations or challenges, though, with the Montague Road corridor is that from gutter to gutter, it's only 12.5 meters wide. Currently, the car lanes are about just over 3 meters, which is about as narrow as you can safely get a car lane to be at those kinds of speeds. The council standards say that for bus lanes, or for lanes to be big enough for buses to safely travel on, they're meant to be like 3.5 meters wide. So there's kind of a bit of a challenge here where if you want to have general traffic lanes and separated bus lanes, it's almost impossible to fit them within the current 12.5 meter width. If you were to really slow down speeds and get, drop speeds to like 20 or 30 kilometers an hour along Montague Road, then you could perhaps get away with having like narrower car lanes that are only, barely just under 3 meters, and then narrower bus lanes of like 3.2, 3.3 meters. But it's a really tight squeeze to fit in 2 car lanes and 2 bus lanes along the Montague Road corridor within the existing sort of distance separation between the gutters. And what we saw recently with the redesign of the Victoria Street intersection was the council was like, all right, we want to add a lane. We want to add in a general turning lane. Where are we? Up at Victoria Street. And to do that, what they had to do was actually acquire or like realign some of the footpath and gutter space. So you can sort of see, if I jump back in time on this aerial view, that's how it used to look with the 2 lanes and the narrow parking lanes. And that was widened out to add in a turning lane. But that basically meant taking space off the footpath, removing street trees, which is not ideal, etc. So the point here is that it's going to be hard to fit in extra lanes on Montague Road without widening the whole corridor. And that's not really something that I think is ideal, because then you're increasing the sort of the amount of bitumen and the distance that pedestrians have to cross and all that sort of stuff. And it feels more and more like a through corridor rather than a local street or a commercial precinct. So, that's a challenge even just to get in both bus lanes and car lanes. But then we also want room for bike lanes, and both bikes and e-scooters. There are obviously, footpaths, but it's not ideal for cyclists and scooters to be sharing those narrow footpaths. Some people have said, oh, well, look, can't we just have the bike lanes or the bikes traveling along Riverside Drive? And obviously Riverside Drive is a really nice corridor for pedestrians and cyclists to ride along the river. But that's not ideal for a few reasons. One is that if you're sort of in this precinct, like let's say you live down here on Drake Street, or maybe you're visiting the ballet or whatever, and then you're traveling from there into like Boundary Street and the center of West End, or maybe you're going to West End State School or wherever. If you're traveling that kind of route, you don't really want to have to do this extra journey where you go all the way down to Riverside Drive and then along and then back up somehow. Like, that's adding hundreds of meters to the journey, and there's a lot of cyclists and e-scooter riders who just don't want to do that. So for that reason, we wouldn't expect cars to do that extra detour. We really need to be catering for that need along Montague Road itself. But it's also the case that because there's so many businesses and residences and destinations along Montague Road, even when you have bike corridor down along Riverside Drive, you've still got people who, at least for the last leg of the trip, they're going to be riding along a bit of Montague Road to get to whatever the local destination is, whether it's like a dance class or a shop or a friend's place, whatever. So we need to find room for bike and scooter lanes on Montague Road as well as for bus lanes, which makes it even trickier And the problem is that once you start trying to repurpose the footpath space and relocate all that guttering, relocate the underground services, the gas pipes, the electrical cables, the stormwater, the sewerage lines, the mains water lines. There's a lot of stuff underground that you have to move, and that makes realigning gutters really, really expensive. So just that intersection project for Victoria Street, that one intersection redesign cost upwards of $10 million. It's a huge amount of money, but to go from that, where you've got no traffic lights and just one lane in each direction, to signals and the turning lane, that was like $10 million. And similarly, the redesign of the Vulture Street intersection up here, which we did a couple of years previous, that some people might remember how that looked before we got the lights in there. It was a smaller intersection. And again, the intersection was widened to add in a turning lane. And so they had to take land off the businesses nearby. And that also cost like $5 or $6 million. That was 4 or 5 years ago. So it's not really going to be cost effective or viable to widen the entire corridor and increase the width gutter to gutter. So here's a street view. This is obviously what Montague Road looks like at the moment. You've got your general traffic lane, you've got your parking lane. At least with these new developments, the council is requiring the developers to be set back a little bit. So we're able to claw back slightly wider footpaths and a bit more space for trees, which is great. And I obviously would like to see a really green corridor with lots of street trees all the way along. But if we're trying to find space for the pedestrian footpaths and the street trees and the bike lanes and the bus lanes and the general traffic lanes, it's starting to get really tight. And it's hard to see how even a council that has lots and lots of money is going to be able to pull that off. It basically means taking more front yards or more land off private properties. So a really big challenge there that's kind of at the core of this thing. I should just note as well, like there's two other kind of projects in the pipeline that might help with this whole question. We've got the proposed bridge, which is a pedestrian and cycling bridge from roughly the end of Forbes Street, but sort of around here, heading over to Toowong. All the major parties have said they agree that that bridge should go ahead. It's kind of just now a question of who pays for it. For a while, the council was saying that the council would pay for the whole thing, but since the floods and the high recovery bill, it seems less likely that the council is going to have the money to do the whole bridge by itself. So maybe they'll have to be pressuring the state or federal government to kick in money. But if that bridge goes in, that's kind of helps our challenge a little bit, because instead of all the people who live here in the western suburbs driving all the way in along Corro Drive and then over one of these bridges and then back around and then back down Montague Road just to get to like the capoeira class, or just to get to like a local business that they're or wherever they're working to along here, instead of driving all that long way, people can just come along the bridge and then walk the last couple of 100 meters. The other big advantage is that it gets all these people here over to the Toowong train station. So there's a certain proportion of people who live in like this part of West End who might be traveling to Indooroopilly or to Graceville or Sherwood or wherever. By walking across the bridge, getting onto the Toowong train line, they can head out to the south and the west along the train corridor a lot quicker and easier. So that bridge actually is quite, I think, important in the broader transport landscape. It's not just a local connection between Toowong and West End, it's connecting West End to that Toowong train line and that rail corridor. The other proposal, which has been there for a long time and which the council still hasn't committed to allocating any money towards, is a proposal for a new CityCat terminal somewhere along the West End riverfront. This was identified way back in like 2010, 2011 as part of the South Brisbane Riverside Neighbourhood Plan, but the LNP have never put the funding towards it. In the neighbourhood plan, it was identified as being at the end of Victoria Street, just here somewhere, but there's probably also a strong case that it could go slightly further north and be a bit closer to Davies Park to cater for all the people who are travelling in and out of Davies Park, or maybe it even goes slightly south towards Kurilpa Street. But given that you've got another CityCat terminal down here and that the bridge is going in over there, probably the best place is still somewhere around Victoria Street, Beasley Street, maybe up towards Jane Street, although then you've got issues with conflict with the rowing clubs. But you don't really want the City Cut terminal to be any closer to the city than Jane Street, because once you're this close, you might as well just be walking or catching a bus. It's going to be quicker to get into the city than to travel by river. So the City Cut terminal is another piece of the transport puzzle. And given how constrained the road corridor is, it may well be the case that we really need that City Cut terminal to be moving a lot of people both in and out of the city, but also back over to Toowong or to St. Lucia or other destinations along the river in the other direction. And then finally, there's the question of exactly, where the bus routes are and where they should stop. Currently, we've got the Blue City Glider, which is really high frequency. It doesn't stop very often, and that's deliberate because they want it to be a fast sort of service. So it only has a couple of stops along the corridor and then big gaps in between. I think the problem there is that right now it's not stopping at the Montague markets, at the Woolworths and that sort of major hub. The 192 does stop there, but it doesn't run on like weekends, and it's not very frequent, and it doesn't run late into the evenings. So the other benefit of the 192 service, though, is that it also connects Highgate Hill, Dutton Park, and UQ. So people who are living along Montague Road and trying to get to UQ can get the 192 service, and people who are living in Highgate Hill or Dutton Park can get a bus into that Montague Road precinct. So improving the frequency and operating hours of the 192 is a really important piece of this puzzle as well. We want to get that service operating more often. We can also talk about like relocating the Blue City Glider stops and stuff, but I think improving the 192 adds more benefit because it's getting more people into that. Like more people from Highgate Hill, Dutton Park into the Montague Road precinct as well, so that you don't have as many cars driving down Dornoch Terrace and driving over the hill. So that's a bit of a broad overview of like what's going on at the moment and the difficulties. Like I said, it's obviously we want green boulevards, we want lots of leafy shade trees, we want spots where people can hang out and chat and linger on the footpath, so that the street feels like a social street. We want to be able to move people efficiently via public transport, but it is a little bit hard when you've got such a constrained corridor, and if you make the road really wide to carry multiple lanes, that's not really a great outcome from a sort of urban amenity perspective. We definitely don't want to be widening it to carry more car lanes, because the more car capacity you add on the road, the more congestion it creates and the more you encourage people to drive. So if we were to add lanes or in some way, it would really be about adding more bus lanes or some kind of shared lane. I'm just going to take you I'm just going to share my screen again to show you Boundary Street, which you'll all recognize, but it's interesting to reflect on the fact that Boundary Street is actually a similar width to Montague Road. So it's also about 12.5 meters from gutter to gutter. But Boundary Street feels really different. It doesn't feel like a through corridor the way Montague Road does. And that's partly because of the way the shops are designed and the way they engage with the streetscape. It's partly, though, because of the lower speed limits. So Boundary Street, it's a 40-kilometre-an-hour speed limit. In practice, a lot of cars are only traveling at 30 kilometres an hour. So for pedestrians, it just feels like a more comfortable road environment. You feel safer, crossing the road, even if there's not a dedicated pedestrian crossing. You can sort of have a conversation on the streetscape, on the footpath, without being drowned out by noisy trucks and whatever. So I think it's just interesting to note that even just lowering the speed limit would probably have quite a big impact to how Montague Road feels and is experienced by both commuters and people who are just hanging out on the streetscape. That's kind of all I wanted to share, was just that we've had a lot of conversations over years about the future of Montague Road, and really one of the challenges we just keep running into is how do we squeeze in car lanes and bus lanes and bike scooter lanes and footpaths that are wide enough and wheelchair accessible and enough room for street trees and little, public space activations with bench seating and whatnot. There's a lot of stuff we're trying to squeeze into that narrow corridor. There's obviously quite a few specific intersections that need a major redesign, like those intersections down near the Woolworths, like Ferry Road, it's really dangerous with cars turning in and out of some of those intersections, and we really need to have probably traffic lights or some kind of shared slow speed environment so that cars aren't turning it across the path of pedestrians, et cetera, et cetera. But rather than getting too caught up in those minor intersection questions, it's really like, what is the vision of the whole corridor? The last thing I'll say, which is a bit of a tangent from transport planning, but is that Montague Road, that whole precinct has always been a big hub for the arts and live music and sort of performances, theatre, et cetera, et cetera. And as more residents are moving into the neighbourhood, there's a bit more pressure to, pushing back against noisy activities. So like live music in particular, but dance classes and whatnot. And I think we need to remember that that's part of what makes West End special. So we need to ensure that people understand, if they're moving into the Montague Road area, that there will be a bit of noise and a bit of live music, or a bit of music from like a DJ late at night. That comes with the neighborhood. That's part of what makes the area special, rather than getting into our heads that we want Montague Road to just be a really quiet residential precinct. That's not how it's been in the past, and that's not really, I think, what the area wants and needs in the future. So we've got to get that balance right too. But anyway, I hope that's really helpful. I know Karilpa Futures is organising a few community discussions under the banner of the Montague Road project. So be sure to check that out. I'll share links in the comments, and hopefully we can keep this discussion going and make sure that we as a community are roughly on the same page, so that we can advocate collectively with one voice to council and the state government. I should have mentioned, it's probably remiss of me, that I'm assuming that we need to take all the street parking off Montague Road. Unfortunately, there's just not enough room for it. We've got to use that space more efficiently for bikes and buses and other stuff. So the street parking, I think, has to go, and that's going to be a difficult thing for some people to hear, but that's the reality. It's the inner city. Street parking is not an efficient use of public land on a major road corridor like Montague Road. So hopefully, if we can improve public transport and active transport options, people don't have to drive as much, and the fight over street parking isn't as big an issue because people have alternative ways to get around. That's the future we want to work towards. And yeah, I guess we just need to collectively advocate and push, particularly the city council, so that it's pursuing those ideas for a more active transport, people-focused road environment, rather than a road environment that's just dominated by cars. Thanks for listening. See you later.